Hi everyone. This video is going to be a bit different compared to the previous videos I've done in the past. So, as you can see from the title, I'm going to be going over my story of how I was able to achieve a 3.7 to 3.9 GPA as shown in my grades here as a former undergraduate student, despite the fact that I had a learning disability. So some goals or some topics that I want to cover in this video today include just going over the story of my learning disability and the steps that I took to help mitigate or manage my learning disability. And the second step, or in the second topic, I want to go over a step-by-step methodology of how I studied in my undergraduate classes and how I was able to achieve those high grades despite having this learning disability. And the advice that I give in this step-by-step methodology can apply to any student, right? Not just students with learning disabilities. And then the third thing that I want to cover is strategies that you can employ, or strategies or methods that you can employ to understand the material rather than memorize it. The fourth topic involves me going through methods or strategies that I didn't use in my undergrad years that I hope to use in the future, as I've had some realizations about these methods lately. And then lastly, there are some aspects that I want to consider outside of studying that I believe could be helpful in helping you achieve academic success. So with that in mind, let's get into the first topic. So before I go over the learning disability, I just want to briefly provide a rationale or valid reasons why I'm choosing to even share this information with random people such as you on the internet, right? Like why I want to share this information with you guys. So firstly, the first reason, there are two reasons. So I'm sharing this information with the intent of publicly journaling and documenting my thoughts. And then the second reason is that I believe that by sharing this information, I'm raising awareness on the issue regarding learning disabilities, in the sense that my experiences with learning disability in school can be used to help guide others in achieving academic success by learning what personal difficulties I experienced from my learning disability and how I overcame my learning disability, and how what I experienced can be used as a guide to help other students that are in a similar situation also achieve academic success. So with that in mind, let's get into the specifics of my learning disability. Alright, so as you can see here, this is my psychological assessment. In this psychological assessment, my learning disability was diagnosed based on the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, or the DSM-5, and the DSM-5 and the diagnosis from the DSM-5 was based on my performance of the IQ test I completed in the psychological assessment, which in this case is the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, or the WICE-4. And from this, and upon completing this assessment, I was diagnosed with a specific learning disorder with impairment in reading. It's not necessarily the same as dyslexia, where I have trouble accurately interpreting the text. I generally am able to interpret the text accurately, but the problem lies in my processing speeds, where I have experienced clinically significant delays in processing the material, where I have trouble rapidly reading the text and identifying keywords, which results in me experiencing delays in accessing my working memory to accurately process, or to quickly process the material. So in essence, I have trouble processing the material effectively. in a timely fashion. So how does this kind of manifest in a school setting? So in a school setting, I generally experience delays in, or I generally have trouble submitting assignments on time or completing exams in a timely manner because it takes me so long to grasp an understanding of what's being asked of me, or what the question or situation is asking me to give a response to. So in essence, it takes a lot of time for me to give a proper response, given the fact that I take a lot longer to process process the situation or the question that's being asked. So you may ask, well, all right, so I'm experiencing an issue with this now. How did I overcome it? Well, that's what we'll get into in the next topic, which involves accommodations. So now that we've gone over my learning disability, that kind of begs the question, how did I mitigate or manage my learning disability? And so I reached out to university services in hopes of obtaining academic accommodations. Now, what are academic accommodations? Academic accommodations, according to Stanford University, are legally mandated modifications, adjustments, service auxiliary aids, or services provided by the university to allow the student to have an equitable and fair opportunity to benefit from the education system like everyone else. So the type of accommodations that a student with learning disability that a student receives depends on the learning disability the student is experiencing. So in my case, because I have a specific learning disorder in impairment in reading, meaning that I have significantly slowed processing speeds, I would be receiving accommodations such as extra time on exams, which is a really important accommodation for me, given that I take more time to process information, right? I would also receive accommodations such as having a distraction-reduced environment to allow me to better improve on my focus. And then I would also receive an accommodation such as receiving a laptop, right, where I could type out my notes instead of having to handwrite them, as that is also time-consuming in the response process. So those are just some examples of accommodations that I receive when I am in school. So now, how do I obtain these accommodations? Now, the process of obtaining accommodations varies between universities. So in the case of my university, UBC, as you can see on this website here, I had to register with the Services for Disability Students, which we refer to as the Center for Accessibility, right? Or CFA for short, right? And upon registering with the CFA, to receive those accommodations, I'd have to provide them documentation that certifies that I am indeed a student with learning disabilities, and that I need accommodations to help me excel in my classes, right? And such documentation could primarily includes your psychological assessment. So the document that I showed you earlier that contains information on my test performance in the IQ test and like other tests that were completed in the psychological assessment, that needs to be provided to the CFA especially, right? It's a very important item that needs to be shown to the CFA, right? And in doing so, the CFA will be able to prepare and prepare and tailor accommodations to the student depending on the learning disability, right? So yeah, ultimately, while I did find the process of seeking out and obtaining accommodations to be a lengthy process, I found that it was well worth it in the end, because I believe that accommodations was able to contribute a significant amount to my academic success. All right. Now we can get into the juicy part of this of this video, where I go through my step-by-step methodology of how I studied in my undergraduate years. So I believe the methodology I applied can be explained in 5 steps. So the first step is identifying the learning objectives, and the learning objectives are usually available in your lecture slides or the course syllabus, right? The purpose of the learning objectives is to direct your studying towards achieving specific learning goals, rather than just simply trying to understand and memorize the entire lecture or the lecture slides covered for that particular lecture, right? It makes it so that you can be a little more time efficient and focus on focus on topics that are of great importance, right? Now, there may be a problem. You may come across a problem where the learning objectives won't be available at sometimes, if not all at all, right? And if this is the case, then I would, and if I had to find some way to study the material without learning objectives, I would actually, unfortunately, I'd have to go to class and actually go through the lecture slides while the professor is covering that particular lecture, and I would essentially highlight or circle key ideas the professor mentions or emphasizes, so that it's easier for me to focus on directing my learning, right, towards achieving a specific learning goal, right? Because I feel that if there's no learning objectives available for me to go through, then I feel that the next step would be to go through the concepts that the professor would emphasize in class. So that's kind of the reason why you'd have to go to class if you don't end up having those learning objectives. Obviously, you should try to attend class as much as you can. I'm not endorsing the idea of skipping class altogether, but you should, like, if you're someone that generally finds it difficult to go to classes, you can rely on the learning objectives. But otherwise, if you don't have those learning objectives, then the next best step or the next best thing that you can do for yourself is go to class, right? The second step. So when you're developing comprehensive notes, or notes that allow you to understand the concepts covered in class or on the lecture slides, you should primarily rely on the lecture slides as your source of information, right? Now, for students with learning disabilities, you could consider reaching out to the professor ahead of class to access slides earlier than other students, so you can study the notes in advance, right? Because the more time you have to develop those notes, the more time you'll have to practice problems, which I'll get into later, right? But it essentially allows you to speed up the learning process and comprehend the material a little more quickly, right? Now, the third step is where you would use the textbook or ChatGPT as the next resource to seek out further information on concepts that you don't fully understand or comprehend, to fill the gaps in your knowledge or answer any important questions you may have about the concepts that you're covering or the content that you're learning, right? Now, I think there's a hierarchy list as to where you should be getting your information from when you're when you're studying. So I think the highest priority is covering the lecture slides first and foremost, then reaching out to the textbook for further information or clarification, and then third, I would seek out ChatGPT, right? And then this actually brings me to the fourth thing, which is the fourth thing that I would bring up in the tier list, which is actually also the fourth step. So as a last resort, if the textbook or ChatGPT or the lecture slides can't answer your questions, I'd consider asking the professor or your friends, probably your friends first, before asking your professor for help in understanding concepts, right? Your friends are there to, your friends or classmates are there are there to study with you to help you learn together and grow, right? So you should try to use them as a resource if you can, right? And by friends, I mean friends that have already taken the class, right? You don't want to ask someone, obviously you wouldn't want to ask a friend that hasn't taken the class and has no knowledge on the subject whatsoever. That simply wouldn't make any sense. It makes more sense to ask friends that have already taken the class previously, right? Even better if they actually took the exact same class that you did, right? But if all else fails, ultimately you can always rely on the professor to cover those gaps in your knowledge if the textbook, ChatGPT, or the lecture slides can't, right? And then this brings me to the final step, which is doing practice problems, sets, or exams. So generally speaking, when you do practice problems and practice sets or practice exams, obviously you want to do as much as you can without without looking at your notes as much as you possibly can, so that you can actively recall the information, right? Making it easier to retain in your head long term, right? But if that fails, don't be afraid to look at your notes as a source of guidance, right? Like, you're studying them for a reason, right? This is your chance to hone and perfect your skills. So feel free to use your notes if you can't rely solely on memorization or like your understanding of the concepts. And then if that fails, then, or once you complete your exams, or once you feel like you can't answer any more questions, then I would look at the answer key and review and revise those concepts to ensure that you understand the problems. And an important note about practice problems, right, is that I think in almost all my classes there's a particular pattern, right, an inherent pattern that you can find in the problem sets or the practice problems. So once you find that rhythm or pattern, it becomes a lot easier to answer the questions, right? So just keep that in mind. So 5 steps: identify learning objectives, rely on your lecture slides, ChatGPT or textbook as the second line of defense, and then lastly friends or professor, and then last step, do practice problems as much as you can, right? So an important note about this methodology is that you should be going into, as an undergraduate student, you generally want to go into classes primarily with the intent to understand rather than memorize, right? And I get that the practice of trying to actively understand concepts and fluidly apply them into solving problems takes a lot more time to get through coursework. And I understand this more than anyone because I needed a reduced course load to help me better learn the concepts through understanding rather than memorization. But you not only retain the concept in your head for a longer period of time, but understanding the concepts helps to consolidate the idea in your head, increasing your capabilities in being able to answer questions effectively, right? And this practice of actively trying to understand the concepts can manifest in the form of mapping out concepts or paraphrasing your notes. I'll go through an example shortly to show you what I mean. Alright, so we're looking at my microbiology class, Introduction to Immunology and Virology. So we can see here that I have my immunology lecture readings. So these are the pre-readings that I would complete, right? And then I would actually do these first. Like, I would do my best to complete the pre-readings before I attended class the following day that would cover the same subject, right? So ideally that's what I aim to do, right? So I'd complete all the pre-readings here, and then once that's done, I would be ready to go and head into the lecture the following day that covered the same material, right? And what's great about this is that once I attend the lecture, I can then see the learning objectives as shown here, right? Which would identify the key concepts that I would need to focus on, right? So by doing that, and then by essentially jotting down my notes. I'll show you my notes. Once I had completed the pre-readings, or to complete the pre-readings, actually, what I did was read through them, and then I paraphrased and personalized my own notes, as well as mapped out the concepts to create a meaningful understanding of the content. So you can see here that, like, it's honestly, it's pretty difficult, because like I can't even show my notes like to the fullest extent, because like I had used up so much of the space, right? But essentially I mapped out a lot of the concepts here, right, that were covered in the lecture readings, right, such as innate immunity, right, from the pre-readings shown here. So all the information I had from the lecture readings, I essentially paraphrased and transferred them here into my own set of notes, and you can see why now that this was very time consuming. But yeah, essentially what happened after that was, once I felt like I had a good grasp of the material, right, just before once I had a good understanding of the material, I would come back to it later when I started doing my preparation questions for the exam, right? I won't disclose any of this information here, but essentially you'll get the gist, right? All right, so now I want to go over some strategies that you can use to help understand the material. So I just want to first emphasize the importance of understanding the material while utilizing rote memorization through flashcards can be a helpful tool in memorizing information. It won't always be helpful in retaining the information in your head, right? You need to participate in study practices that actively force you to make deliberate and effortful connections between concepts to create a meaningful perspective of the content you're studying. And that will ultimately increase the odds of you retaining that information, right? So the first strategy that I want to go through is actively trying to visualize the text so you're reading. So in retrospect, when I had applied this technique of visualizing the text as I read through it, my brain was actively processing the text by working to conjure images in my head, by accessing previous information. In essence, I was making connections between concepts I had learned in the past to novel concepts that I am now studying, right? And that made it easier to understand the information, right? And then the second strategy is honestly a long time strategy that I've been applying since the second grade, or that I've known since the second grade, and I didn't apply it until recently, a couple of years ago. But I believe that with this fundamental framework, I felt that understanding the material became so much easier, right? So there are 5 questions we want to ask ourselves whenever we're covering any concept, right? What is the thing we are studying? How does this thing work? What are the associated mechanisms? Why is this thing important? When does this thing apply? And where does this thing apply? Right? So by asking yourself these 5 questions, you're able to study the concept from an overall or big picture perspective, as well as a granular or micro perspective. And I believe that having both of these perspectives are crucial to help you understand the concept, right? All right. Now we can go through some methods or strategies that I didn't get to apply in my undergraduate years that I hope to use in the future. So the first strategy or method that I didn't apply was Anki flashcards, or flashcards in general. So generally there are 2 reasons why I avoided using flashcards as my primary method of studying. Now, the act of making the flashcards themselves was time consuming, even if you're covering the content passively, right? And the second reason, and I think Jun Yuh describes in his book, The Guide to Academic Success, like beautifully, like this is the second reason. Flashcards generally only allow a student to make a connection between a term and a term, which is a cue, and a definition, the target, for isolated and decontextualized facts, meaning that you're prioritizing information of facts with no clear connection between them instead of trying to create meaningful and long-lasting interpretations of the material you need to cover, right? So, but I realize now, as I am a student pursuing a career in healthcare, I do believe both memorization and understanding are both essential skills to have, and I need to be a master at both of them. And this is why I now consider using Anki flashcards, as they involve the usage of spaced repetition and interleaved practice to help me effectively recall and process the information. If anyone knows how to balance making and studying flashcards, Anki flashcards, while at the same time creating comprehensive notes, like in a time efficient manner, could you please leave some comments below? I'd appreciate it. The next strategy that I didn't get to apply was interleaved practice. So previously I had a tendency to engage in block practice, where I focus exclusively on one subject at a time, especially during exam season. So I did have the luxury of engaging solely in blocked practice as I was taking a reduced course load, but blocked practice can be disadvantageous in the sense that I will likely forget the material I had extensively covered previously, suggesting that I'll have to review the material extensively again during exam prep season. So my hopes in the future are to apply interleaved practices where I frequently switch between studying tasks to promote long-term retention of the material and help me manage my time more effectively. Right. And lastly, the third strategy that I didn't use during my undergraduate years were progress journals. So what are progress journals? Progress journals are a method to measure accountability and ensure that the work you're doing will be reflective of the grade you deserve when you complete examinations. And while I didn't apply the strategy in my undergraduate years, I did apply this strategy or tool in my interview prep for pharmacy school, and I ended up achieving the desired result, getting accepted into pharmacy. So if there are any questions that you guys may have about progress journal, feel free to leave in the comments below about concerns or questions you may have about progress journals. All right, lastly, there are some aspects outside of studying that you also want to consider. So the first thing is your mental health. Oh man, this is a tough subject for me. So universities generally emphasize the importance of managing your time wisely and doing your due diligence to allocate enough time to adequately cover and learn the material. However, it goes without saying that you also need to dedicate your time to personal work that promotes your physical and mental health to allow your brain to adequately rest and recover to better perform in the next study session. So such mental activities could include going to the gym, right? Or doing other physical extracurricular activities. So with going to the gym specifically, like I felt that the gym for me was a great place for meditation and a place to gather your focus to help you adequately prepare for the next study session, while you physically work on yourself, right? And I think a key idea here that I want to emphasize is that you want to see the gym as a privilege and emphasize the importance of self-development in the mind and body while you work out, right? On the other hand, doing other physical extracurricular activities can be cognitively stimulating. From personal experience and seemingly valid research papers, cognitively stimulating activities such as martial arts or bouldering, those are just my personal extracurriculars, can be great for stimulating the brain, in the sense that doing these physical extracurricular activities help me strengthen my cognitive skills, right? And then secondly, the other aspect was my physical health. So aside from the gym, obviously, I just want to emphasize the importance of first. This one, it wasn't my mental health necessarily that I was struggling with, or there are aspects of my mental health that I do struggle with that I have not covered in this video, but more importantly, like the basic fundamentals in my physical health were things that I also struggle with. So The importance of sleep. As many health experts say, and from personal experience, sleeping properly can help your overall performance. That's a basic given, but despite knowing that, I still participate in routines or regimens that aren't necessarily beneficial for my health. Like, I didn't really have a I didn't really have a good sleep routine where, like, if like pressing tasks came up, I would stay up super late to finish them, and I'd end up missing sleep over the course of a couple days. Like, not missing like days of sleep. I mean, like missing days of proper sleep, right? I'd be missing those, right? And I get that's a common experience for students. It's just that it is one of those important things that should be mentioned, right? And then your diet, right? Arguably the most complex aspect outside of studying that also needs to be managed effectively to ensure maximal cognitive performance. So as a student that was previously pursuing a career in nutrition, I do have a good idea of what I need to do for my nutritional health, right? Which, in this case, I think there are several key aspects that we would want to consider when consuming a balanced diet. So a good diet should provide enough calories based on your total daily energy expenditure, or your TDEE, right? So you should be eating enough calories, essentially, right? A diet that promotes the consumption of complex carbohydrates, which prevents spikes in insulin release, that is typically associated with the consumption of simple sugar or carbs, as the latter group of carbohydrates are associated with insulin spikes, right? So essentially what I'm kind of saying here, a diet that promotes the consumption of complex carbohydrates prevents insulin spikes, which personally for me, I found prevents brain fog, or like subtle confusion. Like, I felt like at times, like when I had consumed like really sugary foods, or like ate a lot of calories dense in sugars or simple carbs, I found that like it was really difficult for me to stay focused or stay awake, because I always felt sleepy afterwards, right? And then lastly, a good diet is nutrient dense or rich, suggesting that the diet is rich in macro and micronutrients, and these can come usually from supplements or whole foods. All right, so overall, I did go through a lot of information today. I think I'll timestamp these videos just to be sure, but I think I've pretty much gotten everything I needed to say across. I hope that this video helps. I hope you guys, I hope to anyone watching this will actually benefit from this. And if there's any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I'd be happy to answer them. Thanks.